Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Demystifying the Fellows Recognition Process. This is Mark Delapietro with the SMPS headquarters staff. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. On the right side of your screen, you will see the Go to Webinar sidebar. You can click on the orange arrow to expand or minimize the slide panel. There will also be time for questions and answers during this program. You may either type them into the chat box or use the raise your hand icon to ask your question over the phone. Finally, today's program is being recorded and will be posted at www.smps.org/fellows. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Carla Thompson is Global Marketing Director with Mulvaney G2 Architecture in Seattle, Washington, and also serves as the Fellows Delegate on the SMPS National Board of Directors. She became a Fellow in 1999. Tom Towns is Director of Business Development with Van Note Harvey Associates in Princeton, New Jersey, and a member of the 2010 class of Fellows. As we begin the program, please answer the following question. When are you considering applying for the Fellows designation? This year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 4 years, or 5 or more years from now? Please take a moment to select the answer. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome Tom and Carla, and I will give everybody a minute or two, and then I will share the results of the poll. It looks like we've got still a few more coming in. And you should see the results of the poll on the screen.
So, Mark, should I go ahead and then take over?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Actually, that was pretty interesting information I just saw, and actually we'll be talking to that in a few minutes. And as Mark has already indicated, I became a fellow in 2010. And the reason I'm emphasizing that right now is because I was actually eligible in 2007. But at that time, I just wasn't sure of the direction I was going to take. And quite honestly, I was a little concerned about the process and whether or not I was actually in good position to become a fellow. So I guess I just waited and took my time about it. And then when I actually received my invitation again, and this was actually in 2009, right before 2010 process started, I actually made the decision to pursue for a couple of reasons. One, I was actually going to have the amount of time I felt I could invest into the submission process, and I was also feeling comfortable about. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Sorry, go ahead. I think we lost you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to actually start over again to see exactly where we may have lost myself, but I think we go back to 2010 again and say that that's when I became a fellow. And I was eligible, as I indicated, which you may or may not have heard, back in 2007. But I just wasn't simply sure of what I wanted to do and whether it was the direction I wanted to take. So I actually waited. And then when I received the invitation again, I actually then looked at what I had coming up in front of me. I made the decision to pursue because I felt I could invest the time and submit a quality application. And by being able to say that I was able to invest the time, actually, I wanted to perform my due diligence the way I like to make sure I had all the appropriate information. And very simply, and it's something that we all look at when we're looking at projects and we call Marketing 101 is, you know, you do your research and you do your homework. And I actually took the time and I spoke to dozens of fellows and SMPS staff to understand what was coming up. And I also teamed up with someone from our chapter to apply at the same time so that he and I could actually share information that we learned during the process. And since there was a lot of time spent on my part to present or to make the presentation as best I could, I was actually feeling pretty comfortable about it. And one of the objectives simply of this whole presentation is that this presentation will actually and hopefully save you all some time as well. So the research part being what it is, the next question is, why fellow? Now, that's obviously a question that you're going to have to ask yourself, and it's a question that I asked myself when I began the process. And while I typically for myself am not one to seek titles, what I realized at the time was that I was actually looking for some career justification, and I thought that the title and position actually might help me, especially if I was interested in seeking a new career opportunity that would actually have taken me out of New Jersey and possibly into another state. And actually, I'm still in New Jersey right now. So your why, and I think this is important, may be different. But for me, I was looking at it from why, knowledge, achievement, and credibility. They were all important to me. Now, something that I was not aware of when I actually started the application process was there are special programs that are being made available to fellows. And to go along with that, there are specific opportunities to participate with other fellows. So the question why fellow is something you seriously need to ask yourself, as your reasoning will ultimately and should translate into your application. So at this time, Carl, I'm going to pass it along to you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. Tom brings up a really good point that we all have our own personal reasons for wanting to become a fellow. Like was stated earlier, I became a fellow back in 1999 before they even had CPSMs. Back then I had the designation of SMP, which was Senior Marketing Professional. And being the overachiever that I was, I wanted to, what's next? And, when I looked at that pool of the fellows, and there was only about 50 back then, it had all the past national presidents, the award winners, really the SMPS superstars, the people that I looked up to and I aspired to be like. And I wanted to be part of that group. I wanted to hang out with them and learn from them. And so it was important to me to have that connection with the fellows, and I've never regretted my decision. It was also important for my career. I wanted to be able to show my bosses and my coworkers, my colleagues, that I was expanding my knowledge base about marketing professional services. So the best way to do it was to become a fellow, and it provided instant credibility, like Tom said, and it even helped in my next job when I was interviewing. When my boss saw that if I was a fellow, he equated it to becoming an FAIA, a fellow in the AIA, and what it takes to get there, and he was really impressed, and he didn't even check my references because I was a fellow. So it's, whatever reasons you have, it's important that you figure that out for yourself and make sure that that comes through in your application, as Tom says. It's not easy becoming a fellow. It's a lot of work. It's something that you earn. And so what we recommend is that you do a beta test or a gap analysis, that you take a look at the application, which you can find on that same website that Mark referenced earlier, and take a look at the application and go through it and do a gap analysis, similar to what you did when you became a CPSM. And think about, do you really have the criteria needed to submit? And if you do, then go for it. Create your case. If you have some holes that need to be filled in, well, then make a plan to accomplish that. And that's really the purpose of this webinar, is to help you see what's required and so that you can plan for the future. And 44% wanting to go for it this year is just great, but there's people that were going to do it in a couple of years, so you can start planning now. This process isn't intended to be intimidating or scary. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's empowering. So let's talk about the purpose behind the Fellows designation. It's really, there's twofold reason behind the Fellows program. First is to recognize the association's most senior and accomplished members. And that means those people who have made significant contributions to the industry, to the marketing profession, and in their careers. And secondly, it's to keep those members engaged for the betterment of the society and our members. The collective knowledge of our fellows is one of SMPS's most important assets. I had one person tell me that we're like a walking library. So as a fellow, you'll be called upon to share your knowledge and continue increasing the level of professional services marketing. As the Fellows Delegate for the next 2 years, my job and goal is to engage the fellows at the chapter, regional, and national levels by creating more and better opportunities for them to share the wealth of knowledge and experience they bring to our members.
Now, I'm going to ask to make sure. Mark, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about the role for a second. And when ultimately you get recognized as a fellow, I think there's some important components here that everybody needs to pay and be aware of. You're going to be beginning a new chapter in your S&PS professional career. Now, as a fellow, there are going to be 3 roles that you're going to need to play within S&PS. One is going to be to honor the other outstanding individuals. You're going to meet the needs of fellows, and you're going to use the talents of fellows. So what we need to do now is really just to go over these particular roles and talk about them. The first one is honor outstanding individuals. Now, as a fellow, you're actually going to be part of a select group of achievers who not only have access to tailored programs, but you're also going to have the responsibility to accept leadership roles in the society and mentoring roles in the profession. And this is going to play out in the presentation or in your submission as well, because one of the greatest of these is going to be mentorship. In meeting the needs of fellows, one of the exciting opportunities of being a fellow will be the special events that you're going to be offered. And we can talk about that in a little bit more detail, but some of these opportunities are going to be educational, some are going to be networking, and some even social. Now, again, I think one of the words in here is going to be responsible, but you're going to be held responsible to help define the leadership and management issues that are going to be addressed in professional development. And again, to me, the key word here is responsible, because when you become a fellow, there is going to be a commitment, and as far as I'm concerned, and others, an obligation with that title. As far as using the talents of fellows, with that obligation, there are going to be some clear expectations. And fellows are expected to serve as leaders, and they're expected to serve as mentors. You're going to be expected to find opportunities through writing articles, serving as mentors, serving as leaders, and promoting S&PS. Now, just a quick key, right now, a couple of things that have happened since I was a fellow or became a fellow is that the fellows have all become involved in supporting the local chapters with areas in which you can call upon fellows to speak, to talk, to write, or whatever it may be that could help your chapter. And at the same time, this year, through the leadership of Carla, we're actually starting a chapter champion program so that each chapter has someone that the chapter can call upon, and that would be a fellow for guidance, reference, information, and hopefully that's going to be, it is being implemented, and hopefully it's going to be working very well starting now this coming month for the year 2000 and 2013 and on. Now let's get into eligibility. And I think it's important for all of us just to read the slide as it's written. And as an active member of S&PS, 10 of the past 15 years and currently be a member in good standing. That's a requirement. You must be an active member of S&PS for 10 of the past 15 years and currently be a member in good standing. You need to have 10 years of experience as a marketing or business developer in the AEC industry. You must hold a current CPSM certification designation. And then the last piece is, guess what? You get to complete the detailed application. So in preparation for things coming up, start writing questions down as you've got them so that we can look and hopefully answer them later when we get to the question and answer session. As far as limitations, and here's some helpful information for you as well, no more than 5% of the SMPS total membership may be fellows at any given time. And just so you know, just for number sakes right now, there are roughly, just under, as a matter of fact, 6,000 members. And out of those 6,000 members, there are only 108 fellows currently. Now, just for your benefit, what does that mean to you? Based on 6,000 members, there is a limit of 300 fellows, so there is room for new fellows. There certainly is plenty of room for new fellows. Now, I'm going to say, based on even that comment that I just made, just because applications are received each year, there's not a requirement that a fellow be recognized. The jurors are the ones that are going to be evaluating the applications, and they reserve the right to name no fellows in a given year if there are no qualified applications. Again, this is more protocol. There's no appeals process in this program. The fellow title is valid for regular SMPS members, distinguished life members, and emeritus members, again, all in good standing. Now, the other component, last comment I'll make about limitations, you must remain an active SMPS member to be a fellow. If membership lapses, the fellow designation no longer applies. This year's application deadline, March 28th. It's a Thursday. Typically, applications are always due the end of March, and this year is not really any different. It's just a Thursday this year, and quite honestly, I don't remember whether it was a Thursday or Friday last year, but it's always the end of March. The application fee, $250. I'm sure that you've already seen that and you've noted that. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is going back and talking about the beta test a little bit again. That was one of the reasons I did the research that I did. I wanted to make sure that the financial investment that I was making was appropriate. Very simply, I didn't want to pay $250 if I knew I was not going to be ready. And obviously, this is a great reason for you to do your beta test as well. Don't throw away your money. Make sure that you're in a position to best make your application suited for you. Now, here's something that I did, and actually, Carter's going to talk a little bit about that as well. But originally, when I got involved in my due diligence and research, I was only able to do my research with current fellows, as I mentioned before. However, I'm going to mention to you now that for this presentation and to help you, I actually interviewed former jurors to get their feedback. And I think at this time, Carter's actually going to take over again and speak to the role of the juror.
Thanks, Tom. So let's talk about the application review process a little more, and specifically about the jury. Just so you know, the Fellows Program is governed by the National Board of Directors. They're the only ones that can make changes to the process or the criteria. As the Fellows Delegate, my job is to facilitate that process. The jury is made up of 6 fellows, and it's a 2-year term, and it's staggered so that every year, 3 members leave the jury and 3 new members join it. And they can serve no more than 2 consecutive years. I also participate on the jury, but I'm an ex officio member, so I have no vote. And so why is this important? It's important because every year there's new people coming on, and those new people have different perspectives and viewpoints. And so the importance of the specific criteria that's outlined in the fellow submission may have different weighting with those people. So if you don't make it one year, you could try it the next. Let's talk about juror conduct, because there's some definite rules in terms of how they have to perform. The jury is completely confidential. You won't know who's on the jury, and you're not allowed to lobby anybody to see if you can find out who's on the jury. The jurors have to maintain strict confidence. In fact, they sign a confidentiality agreement, and the process itself is kept in confidence. If you have any questions, you would ask me or Mark at the national office, and we can help you that way. The jurors all report to a jury chairperson, and as I said, any inappropriate questions of the candidates, of other candidates, of the endorsers, or your testimonial givers is automatic cause for dismissal, so you don't want to do that. The jurors are given an evaluation form. The process has become a lot more objective since when I did it in 1999. It's very, the criteria is very specific. There's a point guideline. The maximum points you can get is 100. And so it's very much like an RFP process. Every section has its own point system. So the jurors take a look at the evaluation form. They evaluate all of the different submittals. They review all of them. They grade them and send them back to the jury chair, and then they have a discussion about it. And whatever happens, the scores are never disclosed to the members, or, you know, if you don't become a fellow, you don't get to know the score, and if you do become the fellow, you don't get to know the score.
Well, let's talk about notification here. Everyone, regardless of success or not, everyone gets notified of the results of the application process. If you're successful, you're going to receive a terrific phone call, and you should expect that notification sometime before the end of May, giving you time, by the way, if you've not already had the opportunity to register for the national conference, which is where you would be recognized this year. And I'm pretty sure that that information is on the website, and I believe it's in Florida. I believe it's on Orlando. And I believe it's in July when I am actually going to be in Belgium. So sorry about that, everybody. But in any case, if you are unsuccessful, you will also be contacted, and you will be contacted with the areas, not the errors, but the areas where the jurors actually determined that you were deficient in your qualifications. Now, to me, this is actually great because you actually get feedback and you're not left out in the cold. And that way, if you do decide, and hopefully you will decide if you don't succeed this time, that you will be ready to submit again in 2014. So, Mark, I don't know if you've gotten any questions, or we just need to go right to the juror comments or the next slide. What do you want to do?
We can give people a second or two if you have any questions about kind of the first half of the program. I know there was one question earlier about the obligation to participate in the chapter level and programs and SMPS and all that. A lot of the people who are considering applying, they're already doing that. So how is that different?
Well, I think you're going to find out when we go through this next section or next group of slides. I think that question is going to be answered by itself. So why don't we leave it to that, and if that question is still open, we can address it at the end.
Okay, and there was another one that just came in. How is the designation maintained over the years? Once you've earned it, membership is how you maintain it. As long as you're an active SMPS member, you can maintain your fellow designation.
That's right. Unlike the CPSMs, there's no required CEUs that you have to achieve every year.
So let's go on to the next, and then we have another Q&A slide a little later.
Okay. Let's talk about some juror comments, and this goes back to the comment that I made earlier about doing my research and talking to former jurors and talking to a number of them. And obviously, when I mentioned before, I did not have that opportunity when I made my submission, but what this objective here is with this process, it's important for you to be able to understand how other jurors viewed previous applications, giving you a clue as to how you need to look at your presentation of your application. So here's some important takeaways I want to give to you. First of all, you need to show sustained leadership in the profession. Sustained being the key word. That was one of the comments that came back was sustained. It's not something you did once, it's something that you did for a period of time, and it's continuing. You need to show in your presentation and your application passion about doing it well and right, and the passion needs to show in the application. A lot of people were concerned that they didn't read passion, and they were concerned that you weren't passionate, or the person making the application weren't passionate about the process itself. Make sure that you note something notable, that you've done something notable. What is something notable you have done in the profession and build on that. Make sure you elaborate and go into detail and why it was important to you. That comes down to a major contribution and comment, which we'll go into in a few minutes about the process. You've got to demonstrate a major contribution within, and I'm going to use this word very loudly, outside S&PS. This isn't just about S&PS, it's about the profession. And the other comment, last comment on the slide says overall career performance. Don't hesitate to use these criteria when you perform your self-analysis. So if you don't feel comfortable with being able to demonstrate some of these responses to the comments from former jurors, just think about what you're getting ready to do. Now let's talk about some of the top misses. And these, again, are comments that came from the jurors during their application reviews. First, concrete mentorship outside the firm. Do not underestimate the value of the mentorship role. And it does not have to be solely within S&PS. It's great and it's important, but it doesn't have to be just S&PS. Don't underestimate the value of a mentorship role. Results, outcome from mentorship. It's okay to say you were or are a mentor, but you also need to demonstrate the results, and it needs to be documented in the application. Don't just obviously go and say, I mentored Betty or I mentored Bob. Talk about that mentorship and then go into how it impacted or how it helped them. And again, it may be, you might find that there's going to be more response and information from the mentor letter, which we'll talk about, but make sure you talk about the same thing. Make sure you address it. National leadership, and this may be part to some of the conversation that came up before. Now, while it's not a requirement, it can and could be critical. My suggestion is if you not and have not and you want to get involved on a national level, even if it's only on a committee. And for me, and this was when I looked at my shortcomings, I didn't have any exposure at the national level. So during that period of time when I was thinking about it, I participated on the educational committee at the time, and then the following year I was asked to chair it, and this was the result in reaction to the beta test that I did for myself based on all the other criteria and all the other components that I was evaluating. Understanding of why and the story not being told. The example that they gave to me that there was not a story that was told in the application, and keep in mind this is a juror, and this is a different juror, and it could be a different juror tomorrow when you submit your application. In the narratives, make sure you write and that you told your story clearly. I go back to the who, what, when is always good, but don't forget to address the why in the story. And then I think this is something that's fairly simple but sometimes overlooked. The RFP was not clearly read, and maybe not clearly in that particular case understood. Read what you're being asked to provide. Go back to, as I call it, Marketing 101 again. Example, reply in the order that you're asked for the information. Don't go outside the lines. They're all there for a reason. And again, that was a juror's reaction to an application or two that they looked at and said they can't follow instructions. That's not any different as if you were applying for a project with a client, because they look at it the same way sometimes as will the jurors. So we can talk about some of the evaluation guidelines, and we've already gotten into one of the conversations relative to the process and the scoring. And again, section 4, I think it's B as in boy -6, will outline the scoring for the fellow's application. Candidate's going to need to score a minimum of 80 points to qualify as a fellow. And just as you would base a proposal around the evaluation guidelines of your marketing proposal, your fellow's application should consider the 6 evaluation criteria provided. You've got to address the 6 evaluation criteria. They're described in detail on the application form, and just make sure you provide specific information on what is required with each criterion. And this information is a huge help in completing the application, so my suggestion and recommendation is read it carefully and read it more than once. And as the slide shows, the evaluation factors that are listed there are all listed right there in front of you. I'm not going to read those again, or I'm not going to read those to you. Parameters. It's important to be aware of these 6 evaluation factors because they need to be evidenced within the 5 main parameters included in the application. Now, those parameters that are within the application are work history, S&PS activities, significant contributions, mentorship, endorsements, and testimonials. So you're ready to start completing the 5 sections of the application. This is relative to the why I mentioned to you before, and actually we should be on another slide. Thank you. This is important. If you think it's important to include, it probably is. Make sure you include it. And again, I'll repeat that because I think this is critical to the application. If you think it's important, it probably is. Make sure you include it. So let's talk about the parameters now, the work history. The first of the 5 sections deals with that. What's important here is to make sure you emphasize your experience in marketing and business development with each company you have worked with. If you've only worked with one company, that's simple. But if you've worked with 5 different companies, make sure you emphasize your experience in marketing and business development at each of those companies. And be sure to list your responsibilities reflecting your leadership role within those companies. Make sure you emphasize those leadership roles. S&PS activities. You've got to address them. Jurors are going to be looking for how you participated at each level of S&PS. Again, I think this goes back to one of the comments and questions that we already had a few minutes ago. Make sure you distinguish your role within S&PS between national, regional, and chapter positions and as they apply to programs and awards. And the application allows you to distinguish that. So don't just assume you're going to be submitting an application that just responds to chapter positions. And again, when you start trying to read between the lines, some people, in my opinion, are going to focus on your roles within the S&PS at different levels. Now, if you're looking to pursue your fellow application in the future and not this year, take strong consideration of those requirements for S&PS at all levels. Now, as far as significant contribution, here's where you have an opportunity to, as I said before, tell your story. And here's the opportunity to emphasize the why. As far as professional contribution, what's your most important contribution to the profession? This is all, as I said before, encompassing and not just within S&PS. And that was more referencing the mentorship role, but the same applies here. Because the next contribution they're going to be directed to talk about is strictly to S&PS. So you've got an opportunity to address the profession, but now you have to address S&PS. What have you done for S&PS, and what do you want to continue to do for S&PS? Remember, as a fellow, you're going to have a requirement and an obligation. So these are going to be some of the places as to what you're going to do for S&PS in the future. You're going to need to provide examples of contributions related to, go back again, chapter, regional, national leadership in education, finances, membership, or management. Doesn't mean you have to have everything there. But again, if all you have is chapter, maybe there's a question mark that needs to be raised as the beta test, are you ready? Mentor contributions. And one of the greatest aspects of the S&PS is its members and the members' willingness to support each other. Now, personally, I do not find this common in other professional organizations. Are you offering mentorship to others? If not, You need to. If you haven't, you need to think about how you're going to do that and if you're going to be ready to do that for this application this year. You're going to need to provide a summary with evidence and specific examples of that significant sustained contribution made by the applicant as a member, as a mentor. And then fellow significance. Why do you want to be a fellow? You need to provide a statement describing to the jury what becoming a fellow will mean to you, what it means to you now, and how you expect to continue and expand your contributions to the profession and to S&PS as a fellow. What's paramount is what you're going to do for the profession and not just S&PS. If I were a juror, and I am not, by the way, that would be paramount in my mind as to what your plans are going to be for the profession. And I'll talk a little bit more about the juror and a particular jury's overview and view of certain applications and how they look at it. Endorsements and testimonials. Now, here's going to be some of the pieces of information that you're going to need to provide in its letters of testimony and letters of endorsement. And you have to provide a total of 7 letters. Now, based on my experience, and again, this is going through all the research that I did and what I went through to make my submission, you're going to need to allow roughly 4 to 6 weeks to get your application together. Why? Because you're going to be depending upon other people to help you by getting you information. Example, someone from the chapter, and again, this is pretty clear in the document, is that it's going to specifically need to be the current president, it's going to need to be the immediate past president, or president-elect will need to endorse you. Okay, now, if one of those people can't endorse you, then my simple comment to you is just give Mark a call and say, the current president, I just got here, whatever the situation may be, there are ways to work within the system, but obviously if you do have that relationship within your chapter, you need to get them to endorse you, and it needs to be either the current president, the immediate past president, or the president-elect. Now, they'll need to attest to your significant contributions to the society. Now, and again, this is a technique that I use, by the way, and you can do the same if you want to. While you don't want to write the letter for the person that's going to be endorsing you, what I did was I actually sent them reminders so that they understood or remembered exactly what I believe I had done, and whether they chose to use those or chose not to use those, that was up to them. Because I actually had the past president or the president look and says, oh, I forgot all about that. Now, again, I wasn't writing the letter, but I gave them some bullets about things that I thought were important, contributions that I had made, and they took it and ran with it from there. The comment here or concern is that if you don't do something like that, you might get a letter that actually doesn't address what the jurors are going to be looking for, because they may be missing some important pieces in the endorsement piece that they need to do for you. Now, you're also going to need a letter from someone that you mentored. Now, this, in my mind, could be one of the most important letters you will request, because I think mentorship is something that people look at very hard as a juror. You're going to need a testimonial letter, and again, follow the rules, not to exceed 2 pages, from the protege describing your relationship. The letter is going to need to address the contributions, keyword sustained again, that you made to the mentee, citing examples. Having them elaborate on what your membership meant to them is important. And again, don't be afraid to tell them that this is some of the criteria that you're going to be doing. When I spoke with my mentee, I gave them a copy of the contributions of the mentor section that I had to complete as part of the narrative. This way, they were clearly on the same page as you as to what they needed to provide. It was going to be compatible information, because remember, you have to write a little note about yourself about what you did for a mentor. Just remember, let them write what your mentorship meant to them. Now, component of this, the protege, the mentor, mentee, cannot be a coworker or an employee of the candidate. Now, doesn't mean that you could not have mentored someone that was an employee 5 years ago, and I would suggest that if you have a question about that, you qualify that or get that question in front of Mark as an example, or Carla, get them to answer that if there is a question mark or about whether that person is eligible or not to be qualified or classified as a mentee. But S&PS is primarily looking for what you have done outside your day-to-day job responsibility to encourage others in the profession. And that's why I made the note that it still could be someone that worked for you, but worked for you 5 years ago when you were mentoring them from outside their work environment or your work environment. Now, also, you're going to need to submit 5 testimonial letters from individuals, at least 4 of whom are SMPS members, and 2 of whom are SMPS fellows. Now, quick question, quick comment. Somebody may say, I don't know 2 fellows. My suggestion is talk to Carla, talk to Mark, because there are ways to work within that. But I would encourage you to find 2 fellows to get to support you to provide testimonial letters. It's not going to be that hard, should not be that hard, especially if you have participated at various levels within S&PS. The letters are going to need to substantiate your significant contributions, and again, to the profession as well, to S&PS, and or to the individuals. And make sure that they are highlighting examples of your abilities and accomplishments. No testimonial letter again, go back to complying with what the guidelines tell you. No more than 5 testimonial letters will be considered. So why would you submit 6 when it's telling you only 5 are going to be considered? Now, here's some helpful hints. And again, this goes back to when I did the application, and actually this was recommendations that people gave to me. When you do get those application or you get those other testimonial letters, consider providing contribution examples, as I mentioned, to the writers in advance for them to choose for their letter. The people that you contact to endorse you, as I said, may have forgotten a very important contribution or accomplishment you made in the past. And again, you're not writing the letter for them, but you're helping them with the content. There's a big difference. You're not being asked to write the letter for them. I would encourage you not to write the letter for them, because if they ask you, why don't you put something together and write it for me, who's writing the letter, you or them? Another helpful hint, and I think this is important, seek more than 5 testimonials. Simple reason here, and I'll give you 2 examples. One, it's a safety valve. Safety valve in case somebody forgets and leaves you hanging and you end up falling short of the required 5 letters. I know people are busy, people get caught into things, and all of a sudden they forgot, they went on vacation, and it's too late to get it from them. And again, you don't want to submit more than 5 letters. Now, it's your choice to get testimonials from outside S&PS, but just make sure 4 of them are within S&PS, and 2 of those 4 are from fellows. Now, if you know 4 fellows who can give you testimony, my suggestion is go for it. And remember, these are testaments from them individuals, and this is the key phrase that I like to look at. Testaments from individuals that know you, not know of you. Now, one comment and goes back to the reason why I said a safety valve. And again, this is your choice. And this did actually happen to me. I actually sought 6 or 7 testimonial letters, and I think I got 6 back. One of the 6 letters that I received, quite honestly, I thought was poorly written. And I had a decision to make. I had to choose or delete one of those letters. If you get 6, you have that opportunity to do so, to do that. how you deal with the individual that wrote that testimonial letter for you. I'm not saying that the letter was bad about you. I'm just saying it wasn't well written, because when they're evaluating it, they're looking at the people that are giving you an evaluation, and if it's not coming across well or it's not addressed well, and some people simply write better letters than others, and I can prove that with the 6 letters that I got. 5 of them were outstanding, 1 of them wasn't outstanding. Let's talk about timing here. As I mentioned earlier, don't wait to the last minute to work on your submission. A comment that came back from the jurors or a juror that I had spoken with indicated that if you do, it's going to show. It will show if you choose to wait, because it's going to look rushed, it's going to come across rushed, and it's not going to do and maybe answer everything the way you want to, because it's just not going to happen. So be careful of your timing. I mentioned 4 to 6 weeks. If you're going to pursue and continue to pursue it this year, get busy with it right away. Don't wait until the last 2 to 3 weeks before, because it's going to come across rushed. Trust me, it's not going to work well. I think, Mark, at this time, you're probably up for some questions again.
Yes, we do have a few quick questions. Feel free to type them in. You can also raise your hand and ask a question over the phone. Just one thing I wanted to mention, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, Tom talked about the conference in Orlando, Build Business, July 31 to August 1. The early bird deadline for registration is February 15th. But there was a question in here about, are applicants competing against each other, ranked and top slots are approved, or is each application scored separately? So a score of 85 is one person and different from an 85 from another.
Actually, the next slide is going to address that, to be honest.
Okay.
And it's the role of creativity. And actually, it's not the next slide. I think it's a slide afterwards. But that slide will address, I think, what you're going to be the answer to that question.
Okay. And then just one more question, and then we'll move on. There was a question about whether this webinar would be available. Yes, we are recording it. It will be posted on that web page that I gave earlier. And we'll also be sending out a reminder to those people that were on that eligible to become a fellow list, and we'll include a link to the webinar there as well.
Okay. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about the juror again. And, again, when I had the opportunity to speak with past jurors, they were also asked about what they were looking to see and what mistakes they saw when they did their reviews, what common mistakes that they saw. And so let's talk about the role of creativity. And I know I was concerned about this when I made my application. How should it look? As marketers, remember this. This is not a marketing proposal. The jurors are not looking for glitz. They are looking for a response. And this is where I think the answer to that question is coming up. When you make a marketing submission, people are evaluating your marketing proposal against other people. Here, you're not being judged against other people. You alone are being judged. You're not being looked at and compared against whoever else is making their submission. That's not how it's being evaluated. You're being evaluated based on the guidelines that are in the submission. People don't make comparisons and say, Bob's look better than Bill's, because when they're scoring it based on the submission itself. They're judging you alone and not against someone else that's making their submission. Keep it simple. Keep it truthful. Make sure it's complete. And make sure your story is told clearly. That's where the creativities apply. That's as far as they should apply. Bells and whistles are not going to help. They're not going to make it interesting. It doesn't become interesting if it's cute or fancy packaging. Keep it simple. What's the other S? I'll go along with that one. Anyway, next slide. Previous mistakes. And this is something that I actually, not that I made this mistake, but I made sure I didn't make this mistake. Have someone proof your submission for you. I am my own worst enemy when I try to proof something myself that I did. It needs to be well written, and it needs to be minus mistakes. So if you've got a lot of mistakes in there and you didn't proof it well, guess what? I got someone that knew what they were doing better than I did to review my document. And if I recall correctly, I actually had more than one person review it because I wanted to make sure my document was complete as far as errors, omissions. It was minus mistakes. Now, while you may be anxious to get your fellow recognition, my comment to you is make sure you're ready. That was something that came from previous jurors. It was a premature application. Read what's requested of a fellow, and if you're comfortable with your accomplishment, my comment to you is simply do it. Don't hesitate. If you're not, it might simply be best for you to wait and fill in where you feel you have the holes. That goes back to the comment with regards when you first filled out the survey that talked about when you were looking to complete your submission. There were quite a few that weren't going to be making it this year. That's great. What you've got in front of you now is the process, the application. Look at it now regardless of whether it's next year or the year after next. See where your holes are. And then if you know where your holes are, fill them. And that's going to make your submission then more complete when it's time to happen. Another comment that came back in terms of previous mistakes. Remember, this is your story, and it needs to be a complete story with specificity. A lot of people looked at it and didn't apply information, and I think some of this came across because they waited too late to do it, because they didn't have the time to devote to telling their story. And in referencing to Marketing 101 again, if you have any questions, Mark, Carla, or I hopefully will get you the answer, but follow the rules. If you don't understand the rule, don't interpret it on your own because it could hurt you. Don't do that. Ask the question. You've got people that are willing to help you. You should have Mark's access on the website so you can reach him. And I think Carla and my information will both be available probably at the end if it's not already been on the slide already, but we certainly will be more than welcome to answer any questions. So, Carla, why don't you talk about what's next?
Thanks, Tom. Before I get into that, I think it's important to just summarize a few of the points that you made, just kind of put an exclamation point on them. Obviously, reconnaissance is important. Just like any proposal you would go after that you wanted to win, you would do your homework. And so you would go through, you'd outline your proposal based on the RFP, you'd figure out where your strong points are, where you need to fill in. And if you aren't able to fill them all in, then make a plan to go forward to do that for the year ahead. Also remember that, there's up to 5% of our membership can be a fellow, and we're currently way below that. We want to make Certified Professional Service, CPSM, sorry. We want to make you fellows. So please, there's plenty of room for growth. Make sure that you talk about specifics, not generalities. Make sure that your reference letters talk specifically about your relationship and not just, as Tom says, the fact that they know you, not just know of you. Just like any RFP, make sure that you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. I call it answering the mail. Make sure that you just, do everything that's asked of you there. Also, when you become a fellow, it's not the end of your journey. It's actually a jumping off point for what you're going to contribute in the future and how you're going to be able to contribute to other members and to the chapters in the regions and on a national level. So when you're applying for this, really think about how you're going to use that fellows designation once you get it and put that into your submission. Also remember that as part of the jury process, all of the jurors will write comments on your submission. So if you don't receive your fellowship this year, you'll get those comments back. So it's a very constructive process. It's a win-win no matter which way it works. And as Tom says, don't sell yourself short. You know, all of us are used to working behind the scenes to make other people look good. It's not easy for us to take credit, but this is the empowering part of this process that I talked about earlier. This is like giving yourself one huge pat on the back for all the things that you've accomplished, and I think that you're going to be surprised when you put it all together in this package of how much you've really contributed to the industry, SMPS, and to your own firm. It's a humbling experience, but it's empowering, so I really encourage you to take the opportunity to do this. Now, in terms of what's next, obviously, if you become a fellow, you are expected to continue in a role as a mentor, either to your chapter board or on a regional level or to an individual. The continued and sustained contributions, like I said, it's not the end of a journey, it's just the beginning of becoming a fellow and all the journey that that's going to take you. And that requires, promoting both our profession and SMPS. The first thing that will happen when you become a fellow is that we'll get you involved in, into the Fellows Resource Directory, and you can find a copy of that on that same website site that Mark referenced earlier, the Fellows site. And that allows you to list all your areas of expertise. And we make that resource directory available to everybody so that they can see who they can call upon if they need help. That's part of the mentoring program. You'll also be invited to the Fellows Symposium at the National Conference. And these are very high-level discussions, speakers talking about marketing trends, where the industry is going. And it's Fellows only, followed by a Fellows only cocktail hour. So that's part of the social part. We are a community, and it's important that we get together and have time to talk. You'll be introduced at the awards gala, and I'll right away bring you into the Chapter Champions program. Tom mentioned it earlier. It's a new program this year, but it's a way to connect both the fellows to the chapters and letting the chapters gain all that experience that you've gained over your career. So, and let me say, too, that if you need help on your submission, we already have chapter champions in place. So if you need some help, let me know. I can direct you to somebody who can either guide you through the process or perhaps critique it before you send it in. Also, if you talk to a fellow and ask somebody to submit an endorsement letter for you and they say they can't, it's because they're on the jury. It's not because they don't want to. So, again, if you need some help there, let us know. We also have fellows forums at regional levels. We do them at chapters that have enough fellows, and we do them at regional conferences. So that's something else that I would wrap you into. And then finally, we have publishing opportunities that are open only to fellows. So there's a lot to be gained. Probably most important is just being part of this fellows community, being part of this group of people that you look up to and that you can learn from. And I hope that you'll take an opportunity to do this. Before we stop, I wanted to just thank Tom for putting this together. I wish I'd had something like this when I went through my submission. This is really great, Tom, that you've done this and taken the time to share what you learned through this process with the people that want to apply in the future. And to Mark, thank you very much for organizing this. We couldn't have done it without you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Carla and Tom. We have a few more questions and answers. A few more have come in. There was one that I will address real quick before I pass it off to Tom and Carla for any other additional comments. The app says one hard copy and submittal electronically in Word and all attachments in PDF. Does this mean we must use the actual app form? Yes, you must use the Word application form. If you have any trouble with it, if it gets a little quirky, feel free to contact me and I can help with that. But as Tom was talking about, it's focusing on the content, not necessarily the fonts and the colors and all that kind of stuff. And the other thing I was going to mention along those lines is, I know as marketers, the tendency is to try and come up with a beautiful package. Those are just going to go into a file cabinet. The jury is not going to see those. They're only going to get the electronic version. So focus your efforts on the content and not necessarily the design of the package or the fonts and stuff like that. Carla or Tom, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
Go ahead, Carla.
Another question, how many fellow applicants are submitted each year?
It varies depending on how many CPSMs want to apply. And as Tom said earlier, the jury doesn't have to put those CPSMs through. It's, they have the choice to not appoint anybody to a fellowship, or they might appoint all of them. So it just depends. Every year it's different.
And when would we know if we are selected?
End of May, if I understand correctly. That's what the basic rule has been, and the notification will happen before the end of May. That goes back to giving people time. If they hadn't already planned to go to national, they'll still have that time to do so. I mean, I think that's still the case, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, sometimes it's a little earlier than that, but no later than the end of May.
Right.
If you're not initially accepted as a fellow, how many times can you reapply?
As many as you'd like. There is no limit on how many you can submit. I mean, hopefully you would submit it, have to do it twice, because the first time you'd get great feedback and you'd go back and you'd fill those gaps.
And that is the end of the questions in the chat box. But again, you both said, and I'm happy to assist after the call as well, but feel free to reach out to Tom and Carla.
I just noticed the email addresses are there.
So with that, I will hand it off to Tom and Carla for any final comments.
Actually, I'm going to let Carla finalize things here, but I just want to say to everybody, good luck. There's not too much mystery here, even though we talk about demystifying. There's not too much mystery in this process. You've got the application, you've got the guidelines, you've got the rules. Don't make something that it's not. And that would be my best guideline, and make sure you've done your homework and that you've done your gap analysis or your beta test, so to say, as has been mentioned several times.
And I would just add that Tom and Mark and I are all available. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. That's what we're here for. And I hope that you'll submit. I look forward to welcoming in a whole class of new fellows this year at the National Conference. Thanks for attending.
Thank you, everybody, and that concludes the program.